This is a story from 1917 during the war in Germany. We saw German soldiers screaming everywhere. There were corpses all around, and everyone was scared. In the midst of this, we see a young soldier. He was very young and frightened by the sight of corpses around him. He was sitting in one place, observing the situation. Then, another soldier came to him and said, "You can't sit like this. You have to fight with us." The young soldier stood up and went to the battlefield with the rest of the soldiers. That German soldier killed a French soldier for the first time. Time went by. We now see many corpses of soldiers who were killed in the war between Germany and France. Among these corpses was that young soldier who was very scared a while ago. His corpse had started rotting. All the soldiers' corpses were locked in coffins, and one by one their uniforms were removed. These uniforms were sent back to the city to be washed and given to new soldiers. Meanwhile, we see the city. A boy named Paul, who dreamed of becoming a brave soldier, wanted to go to war. He arrived at the place where the army was selecting soldiers to fight. He filled out his form and submitted it, but his father's signature was missing because he knew his father would never allow him to join the army. So, he cleverly forged his father's signature and joined the army with his friends. All the selected soldiers gathered in one place. The general came and told everyone that being a soldier was a matter of pride. Hearing this, everyone was even more excited. They were given the same uniforms that had been removed from the dead soldiers' bodies. Paul and his friends were proud to wear the soldier's uniform, believing that the life of a soldier would be wonderful and that this was a great day in their lives. They were informed that all the soldiers would be taken to the Western Front, located to the north of France. The soldiers set out for the Western Front, but they were told to get off the truck halfway and continue their journey on foot. As they began walking, bombs planted by the French soldiers started exploding in the ground. They all lay down and were instructed to quickly wear their masks, as they might be attacked with dangerous gas that could lead to death. As they put on their masks, Paul noticed that his companion was struggling with his. When Paul tried to help him, he was scolded by his senior, who said, "Help someone else only after you have put on your mask first." After this, they all moved on. When they reached the base, the conditions were dire. The base was flooded with water. Everyone was told they had to collect water from there. Lacking buckets or any other equipment, they took off their helmets and started fetching water with them. Paul met a man there who informed him about the situation. Meanwhile, his friend, seeing the conditions, was very upset. He said to Paul, "I didn't know war would be like this. I can't stay here. I need to go back home." But there was no point in such thoughts now, as they couldn't leave without fighting. As they continued drawing water, it got dark. At night, they were assigned to guard the border. While Paul was guarding with his friends, he was unaware that a bullet could hit him at any moment. Suddenly, a bullet struck his helmet, knocking him down. He realized that if the bullet hadn't hit his helmet, he wouldn't be alive, as his helmet had saved him. Soon, bombs started falling, causing chaos. All the soldiers hid in the basement. Bullets were being fired everywhere. Paul's friend, who regretted coming here, was terrified and kept screaming that he wanted to go back home. But no one was there to listen. When one of their friends tried to go out, a bomb exploded at his feet, blowing his body into pieces. This horrifying scene scared everyone even more. As the bombs continued to explode, everyone feared the basement would collapse, so they decided to escape as quickly as possible. Everyone left, but Paul stayed behind. Eventually, the basement did collapse, and everyone thought Paul had died. In the morning, when the soldiers removed the debris, they found Paul still alive. They pulled him out and placed him in a safe spot. The same man who had first met Paul and informed him about the place approached him again. Knowing Paul would be hungry, he gave him a piece of bread. Then a soldier came and told Paul that he couldn't just sit idle. He needed to collect the badges of all the fallen soldiers, which had their names on them, so their families could be informed. While collecting the badges, Paul found his friend's glasses. Going a little further, he discovered his friend's dead body. Seeing this, Paul started crying, but knew he couldn't cry for long. He continued his work. Time passed, and the names of the deceased soldiers were being recorded in a register by an officer named Matthias. He informed his senior officer that more than 40,000 soldiers had been killed. We should stop this war. Otherwise, who knows what will happen? Matthias thought about how to end the war after hearing this. He called all his senior officers for a meeting. Meanwhile, Paul and his team were being sent from one place to another. They arrived at another base where they had to stay with more soldiers. Upon arriving, they discovered a nearby farm. Paul and his friend stole ducks from the farm, cooked them, and enjoyed a delicious meal. It was the first good meal they had in a long time. While having dinner and snatching potatoes, they noticed some beautiful French girls. One of Paul's friends tried to impress them with a strange dance and ended up going with them. Later, letters from home were distributed among everyone. One of Paul's friends, who couldn't read or write, gave his letter to Paul to read. Paul found out that his friend had a wife and child, but the child had died from a disease. That night, the friend who had gone with the girls returned and told them the whole story, showing them a handkerchief he had brought back. The next morning, they received news that 60 more soldiers were coming but had not yet reached their base. Everyone was worried, so Paul took the soldiers to find them. When they reached the station where the soldiers were supposed to arrive, they detected the presence of gas. In a nearby room, they discovered that all 60 soldiers had died from the gas because they had removed their masks too soon. Seeing the corpses terrified everyone. In Germany, a senior head was informed that the 60 soldiers sent to the war had also been killed. A soldier suggested stopping the war, but the head refused, saying, "I can't stop this war. I don't like defeat. Send all remaining soldiers to the Western Front, and if needed, gather more soldiers." Matthias, worried about the daily deaths, wanted to stop the war and tried to communicate with the government. Paul and his team were ordered to move towards the Western Front. Matthias successfully gathered all the officers and explained the devastating effects of the war on the country, advocating for its end. He prepared reports for the officers to sign to end the war. However, a French officer refused to sign, saying he would discuss it after 72 hours. Matthias angrily protested, "Sir, after 72 hours, who knows how many innocent soldiers will die?" But the French officer remained adamant. Despite Matthias's efforts, Paul and the other soldiers were ordered to move towards France, and they obeyed. On the way, all the French soldiers were killing everyone one by one. Meanwhile, Paul and his team reached their kitchen, where they found delicious food. Everyone was shocked to see the food. They then heard strange noises outside. When they went out, they saw French soldiers had brought very large tanks. When the Germans fired at them, they realized their bullets were ineffective because the tanks were very strong. The tanks were slowly advancing, killing German soldiers one by one. The German soldiers then placed bombs on the tanks, causing them to explode. However, the French soldiers now had flamethrowers, which they used to kill the German soldiers. During the chaos, Paul's friend was captured. Despite his pleas and surrender, the French soldiers burned him alive. Paul was devastated by this. Meanwhile, Matthias received a report indicating that some German officers didn't want the war to end. Matthias discussed this with other officers, insisting they needed to end the war. One officer argued that France would take over if they did, but Matthias insisted on a compromise. On the battlefield, the French Air Force attacked the German soldiers, bombarding them with bullets and bombs. Paul fell into the water due to an explosion and pretended to be dead to avoid further attacks. When he was about to get up, a French soldier saw him and started firing at him. The soldier slipped and fell, allowing Paul to catch him and stab him repeatedly with a knife. The soldier didn't die immediately, so Paul stuffed mud into his mouth to suffocate him. Later, Paul regretted his actions and tried to save the soldier. He found a picture of the soldier's wife and daughter in his pocket. The soldier eventually died, and Paul promised to visit his family and tell them he was a brave soldier. Paul returned to his base, where everyone was celebrating their victory. He gave a wounded soldier the handkerchief he had taken from the French soldier. The wounded soldier, knowing he wouldn't survive, stole a fork and stabbed himself in the neck, killing himself. Another soldier told Paul that he had heard the war was about to end. Paul replied that he wasn't sure. Meanwhile, Matthias had obtained permission from all the German officers to end the war. However, France refused to sign the papers, stating the war would continue for another 6 hours. Similarly, in the morning, we see Paul going to the farm with his companion to steal something to eat. Paul sneaks into the farm while his companion stands guard outside. However, the farmer's son spots them and shoots Paul's companion in the stomach. Paul, worried about his companion, says, "Let me take the bullet out." His companion replies, "No, just give me a cigarette and take me to the base. I'll be treated there." Paul complies and carries his companion. On the way, they see a car full of soldiers celebrating because the war is over. Paul asks for help, but no one assists him. When they reach the base, the doctor informs Paul that his companion is dead. Paul is in disbelief, saying, "How can this be? It was just one bullet in his stomach. How could he die?" The doctor explains, "Because you were late. The bullet passed through his liver, causing poison to spread in his body." Paul is devastated to hear this, as the war has taken away all his companions, including his last one. Paul is then ordered to report to the head, who still hasn't given up. The head tells the soldiers that they still have some time left and need to attack France and kill as many as they can. Many soldiers disagree, not wanting to continue fighting, but they are forced to comply. They reach the French base and wait for 11 o'clock. Before that, the French soldiers launch an attack on the Germans. Paul sees a French soldier killing a young German recruit. He saves the boy and takes him to the basement. However, a French soldier stabs Paul from behind. Shortly after, the announcement is made that the war is over. Injured, Paul slowly moves forward to witness the scene after the war. He comes out and collapses. The boy whose life Paul saved is instructed by an officer to gather the dead soldiers. The boy finds Paul, now dead, with the same handkerchief given to him by his injured companion. The boy takes the handkerchief and puts it around his neck to remember Paul, who had saved his life. This was the story of Paul, who believed that becoming a soldier would bring happiness, unaware of the difficulties he would face. Many brave soldiers stand at our borders, risking their lives to protect us. And with this, the story of this film ends.